Hello everyone and welcome to a Christmas special, this time focusing on the Focus, again no pun intended, and drawing a very straightforward question. Should the Focus Mark 1 be considered one of the greatest cars that's ever been made? There are very strong cases to suggest why that is the case, and I'm going to go through a few reasons why, some of which are fairly obvious anyway, but I think it needs to be said very clearly. Well, firstly, I'm thinking, well, what are the greatest cars? What are the current greatest cars that most car enthusiasts will probably name in their all-time top 10? To be fair, that list depends on the person. Most people who are into American cars will say the Mustang, and then those people who generally be into European cars might say the 2CV. And then in the UK, it's got to be the original Mini. There were all sorts of interpretations of what could be classed as the great or a great car, and people's interpretations go. It can be stretched a little bit in terms of the word great. A lot of good cars, in my opinion, some people have described as great. It is an opinion, but I think the word great is overused. And I think there are many very good cars, but there is something missing that makes them a great car. And that usually is a few factors. One, that the car is still in the public consciousness after many decades. That's a thing. Now, when I say public consciousness, if you went to a member of the public and showed them a load of pictures and said, right, which one's a Mini? They'd point to a Mini. And yet we're talking about people that have no interest in cars whatsoever, but can identify an old Mini from a group of pictures. That's the public consciousness. If you did the same with a Mark 1 Focus, if you asked them, right, so here's a picture of, right, one of the pictures is an old Focus, picture of a Focus, picture of a couple of different cars from the same time maybe. Right, where's the Focus? Oh, it's that one. They'll be able to identify an old Focus straight away. Most people refer to them as old Focus, or the original, and which it is. So whichever way, but most people can identify a Mark 1 Focus. So that's one box ticked. The Focus Mark 1, since 25 years ago, is still in the public consciousness, and it's still there. So I think that's one box ticked. The other one is movies. Movies, yeah. There's no better way of cementing a car's legacy than a movie. I mean, with the Mini, you had the Italian Job, great movie. Who hasn't watched that? And then you have the Beetle, which again is a fantastic people's part of car around the world, was produced for so long, it's untrue. And that is definitely a great car, even though I would say as a design, it wasn't exactly bold, but it's what the people needed. It was a people's car. That's definitely one. And that car was immortalised in the series Herbie. Again, great series. I used to love that as a kid. So again, you've got two great cars cemented by movies. The movies probably helped the Mini more than the Beetle. I think the Mini definitely wouldn't have been as famous without that movie, and the Beetle also potentially. But you always need a helping hand. And the Focus, oh yeah, Cat in the Hat. It doesn't ring the same bell, does it? No, it does. To be fair, The Cat in the Hat is a damn good movie. And if you want to get together as a family and watch a movie, do you know what? Really light-hearted, watch Cat in the Hat. Fine, no problem. Classic movie, great. And the fact that they decided to have the whole street depicted in Mark 1 Focuses, every single one of them was the same car. I think it was quite a good idea, because the Mark 1 always looks like a futuristic spaceship to me. And the best thing is, somebody thought it'd be a good idea to cover the back arches up. So it now looks like a sort of spaceship hovercraft from a 1960s sci-fi movie. I think that's utterly amazing and very much in keeping with the exterior design of the car. So I think this car has been somewhat cemented in the public consciousness with that movie. But then again, you know, it's a different audience. It's a sort of child-based, young family sort of audience. Whereas the two other movies are, well, again, I would say quite family orientated as well. Anybody can watch those two movies. So that's the movies trail, and I thought that'd be quite interesting. Now, obviously, with the Mini, the 2CV, and the Beetle, they were all in production a long time, a very, very long time. Whereas this car, 7 years, again, not as long. But that doesn't matter, because this car was sold in just as higher numbers, well, way higher numbers for the length of production, for the amount of cars that was produced. Remember, it only finished in 2005 within Europe. It continued to 2007 elsewhere. So let's say 9 years, and it would have probably sold in far greater numbers than the Mini, the Beetle, and the 2CV in terms of the amount of years, proportioned years to ratio to the amount manufactured. But it took the Mini 41 years to achieve over 5 million. The Focus, I believe, was a couple of million. So that's amazing, and it flew off the shelves, and it was the right car at the right time. It was a car that saved Ford. Now, you could argue the Mini probably helped the British Leyland to sell a lot of other cars, because it was quite a well sorted after car. They did rust. They weren't particularly popular as what people think. I think people seem to get into a rose tinted spectacles about Minis. They weren't the most reliable of cars. No cars were about then. They rusted like nothing, but they were great to drive, and I think there was enough good things about the Mini for the other stablemates in the British Leyland BMC lineup to get the benefit from basically having the Mini as a smaller brother. You know, you want to step up to a bigger family car, so you bought an 1100, etc. And they were great cars as well. I think very good cars, not great cars, very good cars. So I've done it myself there. And it pretty much, I think, staved off a lot. The Mini never made any money, but the truth is it kept the perception of British Leyland going that they actually make really fun cars. And they did, actually, to be fair. The 1100, the Austin 1100, the ADO 16 was another example of a very fun car, actually, as a family car. Now, with VW, the Beetle saved VW 100%. It would not exist for that car. Citroen, again, with the 2CV. The 2CV was not designed as a fun car. It was designed as a functional car. And then I would say it pretty much saved Citroen. I don't think Citroen would exist without that car. And I would say Ford would have been in severe trouble without this car. Yes, the Mondeo was a revolution when it came out, the Mark 1 Mondeo. But it still wasn't brilliant. I wouldn't say a Mark 1 or Mark 2 Mondeo. They don't float my boat. And I class them as good cars, very good cars, but not outstanding cars, excellent cars, because they never sold in the numbers that they were supposed to, and there were a lot of problems early on. This car is an outstanding car. It is a great car, because it not only saved Ford, and I think Ford actually knew this. They couldn't do the penny pinching that they'd done with the Escorts and the Fiestas of the past. They needed to spend big on their next car, and they needed to be so bold. It was so un-Ford-like, which is the common complaint about these, that people actually, some people would come to me and say, I don't like Focus Mark 1s, I prefer the Escorts. And the answer is always the same. It boils down to the traditional Ford element. An old Escort Mark 6 has traditional Ford elements in it. A Mark 1 Focus is actually so unlike a Ford, it's untrue, because there's no aspects of this car, apart from possibly the transmission and the engine, that were carried over. They were the only things that were carried over from previous models, or from the Escort and the Fiestas. There was nothing that got carried over. It was all clean sheet. And that's what makes, for me, the basis of a great car. There have been many cars that have been clean sheet. My P6 was a clean sheet design. Was that a great car? I would say borderline great, but it's not exactly a car that lingers in the public consciousness. So as much as it was a great design and a sophisticated design, it isn't quite a great car, because it never sold in massively high numbers. It's not a people's car. And that's the next thing I'll come to. All these cars that I'm talking about are people's cars. The Rover P6 was a middleman's car. If you had a really good income and you could get your hands on a P6, that's what you got. You got a lot of good car for your money, but you did pay through the nose for it. There's a lot of cars in that category. But as far as a people's car is concerned, it has to be affordable, cheap, relatively reliable family cars that were good and fun to drive. So that rules out the 2CV in that basis and the VW Beetle, because really I don't think they're great to drive, but they're okay. The VW Beetle, I think, is sort of a social, diverse car. And when I say that, it's owned by similar sorts of people. But I mean, beforehand, before Ford designed this car, there was kind of a sort of a feeling around Ford. If you bought a Ford, it would just be another one of those Dagenham dustbins. They just rust and they just fall apart. The electrics fall to pieces. But then majority of them are quite reliable. Most people have very good stories to tell about 90s Fords, Escorts, Fiestas, Fiesta Mark IIIs for one. But they weren't great cars because there was a lot of penny pinching that went on. And you could tell. But with the Mark I, it was a completely different picture. They spent thousands and millions on this car. I shouldn't say thousands, because it's millions they spent on this, designing it to a T. Richard Parry Jones ended up designing the Mark II Focus, which was actually a disappointment, and I think he would have admitted that himself. The exterior did not match how good the car was underneath. I think the Mark II is a really good grown-up version of a Mark I underneath. But the exterior was a disappointment, but they got it right with the Mark 2.5 facelift. They corrected it, and that is, I think the Mark 2.5 Focus will be known as a great car in the future. I really do believe that. I think it's every bit as good as a Mark I, but there's something very, very special about a Mark I, and that is how its childlike go-kart manner just feels on the road. It's exactly the same feeling that you would get in a Mini. I'm not joking. It handles like it's on rails. It's a bigger car than the Mini, obviously, but it's not actually that much bigger. It handles in exactly the same proportions. You point and it sticks. It's that front-wheel drive philosophy that started with the Mini and that this car took on. And it kind of, this car, what did this car change in the world of motoring? Well, the first thing that this car changed was what people could expect from a Ford. Secondly, what people could expect from a hatchback. Independent rear suspension. It raised the game. It moved things on. Unfortunately, what's happened now is manufacturers have gone back to old torsion beams and ditched this independent setup because it's cheaper. So we've gone back from a world of innovation, and instead of going forwards to going back with torsion beam because it's cheaper. And that's kind of depicts the last 5-6 years of modern cars for you. There were so many design features of this car. I mean, the high level rear light clusters, never been done before. No one has ever done that before with any car. And it's so true that all the lines that were used on this car, you look at every car from around probably the last 20 years, they will all have curves and creases and swage lines exactly like this car. Some cars have done it before in high proportions. Yes, I know people are going to say Fiat Punto Mark 1s came out with high level rear lights. I understand that, but Ford were probably working on it at roughly the same time that Fiat actually brought out the Punto. Remember, they were designing cars years and years in advance. Obviously, this car would have started on the design board 5-6 years earlier, maybe longer than that. Car manufacturers work several years in advance for their next model. That's what you have to understand. But being a reliable family car, and it's still, this is the thing, this car's legacy is that people are still buying these to run as daily drivers today. I don't think that's appropriate, but that is what is happening. And 25 years after the launch, well, that's just remarkable. For a car that actually ended production 18 years ago, I don't think there are many cars that can say 18 years after they finished production, people are still buying them to drive them as a daily driver. Can you name a Mini or 2CV or Beetle that people were buying 18 years after they finished to daily drive? That's, for me, what makes this probably the number one in my opinion. But there are people who probably laugh at that, but that is actually very, very true. So there's my point. Oh, but hold on a second. Wait a minute. When you're talking about people's cars, what about the Fiesta? Well, the problem is with the Fiesta, as a car, it is a people's car. You are very right about that. But it's a difference between being a people's car and a great car. And the Fiesta of any generation, I don't think you can consider to be a great car. I think the closest one is a Mark 7 Fiesta, which was in production for 9 years, and it handles like a Mark 1 Focus. It has all the Ford Focus Mark 1 DNA inside a modern Fiesta body shell, which is why they sold so well and they kept it in production for such a long time before the rubbish Mark 8 came along. And they are rubbish. There's nothing to be said for them. They're nothing like Mark 7s. It was an evolution of a Mark 7. No, it's not. It's rubbish. So a Mark 7 Fiesta will probably be a great car in the future because it encompasses all the design features. Modern car. It had some quirks that no other car had at the time, and a lot of manufacturers started copying it. I would also say the Mark III Fiesta, I'm a bit biased there, but actually the Mark III Fiesta was a massive step away from the Mark 1-2 boxy Fiesta. So actually, ideally, it's kind of, it was a step up, but it wasn't revolutionary. Not completely. It was very bold and very different, and I think it was more of a fashion statement from Ford, and it moved the game on for Ford a little bit, but it wasn't revolutionary. It was a very good car, Mark III. Mark IV is a good car. Mark V is a good car. Mark VI is not a good car. I just don't think they're very good, Mark VIs. But as a brand, as a marquee, Fiestas are a great people's car, but they're not a great car when it comes to an individual. And which Fiesta do I pick to compete with the Mini, the 2CV, the Beetle, which was basically one car but tweaked over time, and the Focus Mark 1. I can't really choose one. It'd have to be the Mark 7 Fiesta, but really they haven't got to an age where I can say that that's a great car. Time will tell whether that car stays in the public consciousness. And lastly, really, I could go on all day about how many design features this car has that makes it a great car. I could go on forever. The truth is, I'm going to leave that for more episodes. This was kind of brief, but it outlines my thoughts on where this car stands, and it should be considered one of the greatest cars that has ever been made. And I'm not sure why it isn't. I think time will tell with this one. I also think the mark of a great car is a really good movement, its own enthusiast groups, and I do believe that the preservation group is growing every single day. There are events booked for next year. Next year is going to be a very exciting year. I have organised 2 gatherings at 2 specific venues. If you're in the group, you can come. Please come. We want as many Mark 1s gathered in as many in these venues as possible to show the strength of the group and the movement. Look at the Mini movement, Mini Mania, all those mini groups. That's what makes that a great car, because people think it is. The 2CV as a great owners clubs. VW Beetle, the same. And the Focus will definitely have that. And there are many of these still on the roads. And I do think that in terms of the amount of these left on the roads, that is also going to be a sign of how great a car this is. Because I don't know how many Minis are left today. Probably 10,000 or something like that Minis. Can't remember off the top of my head. But these, there might be a bit more of them for Minis. And that is a good mark of where these cars are. Anyway, I'll leave you be. You take care. From me and 50 Shades of Panther Black. Have a happy Christmas. Take care.